Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to our discussion of Humankind Chapter 5. A few reminders before we get started. First of all, before you watch this full video, make sure to go back and read Chapter 5 in the book Humankind. Do that first and then come watch this video. And then after you watch this video, take the quiz that's in the module for week 4 for this chapter, Humankind Chapter 5. And it's due next Sunday by midnight, like all the quizzes. And remember that there are extra credit opportunities in case you don't do as well on the quiz as you like. You can check the announcement sections. I've already announced 2 extra credit opportunities. There will be more coming, and some of them are events that you have to attend during a certain time frame. Others of them are things you can do on your own time. So there will be lots of different opportunities for extra credit. Don't stress it if the quiz doesn't go precisely as you would like. Remember that next week we have our first exam. I'll be sending out a study guide for that. But keep that in mind that you're going to want to make sure that you have all the content we have learned about, discussed, and taken quizzes on so far mastered before we get to the exam next week. Okay, let's get started. So after we read chapter 4, there are a few questions that kind of remain right now that we're going to be grappling with in this chapter and throughout the rest of the course as well. So first of all, I want you to note that in the last chapter, chapter 4, and also in some of the earlier chapters, we have encountered several so-called experts and scientists who turned out to be wrong. Seems like maybe that's not such a surprise, but these are very famous people. Steven Pinker, for example, that we talked about last video, is a highly influential, highly cited person who has shaped a lot of the ideas about who humans are among contemporary people. Like he's talked about, he's still alive, he's still very influential today, right now. And yet, one of his most influential books turns out on closer analysis to not be true. So we have him, we have Raymond Dart back in 1924, we have Napoleon Chagnon having been wrong. We also have Richard Dawkins, a very famous atheist who turns out to be wrong about some of his basic assumptions of what humans are like in terms of our human nature. So what does this tell us as critical thinkers about how we know what's right or wrong, true or not in the world, if the so-called experts can sometimes get it wrong? So we'll be continuing to talk about that later in the next chapter, thinking about various ways in which expertise, whether journalistic expertise or scientific expertise, other forms of expertise, can go wrong, and how we confront that problem as critical thinkers. How do we know what we know if sometimes what we think we know turns out to not be so true? Another question that I think is confronting us right now, based on what we have learned so far, is this question of, all right, so there are these prehistoric humans, there are these hunter-gatherers, there are ancient civilizations that started with agriculture. We're now well past that. We are past industrialization. We're into this post-industrialization era of robots and AI. We're like beyond industrialization. So why should we care what proto-humans looked like or did or thought or how they acted? Why should we care what early hunter-gatherers were like? What does any of this matter for understanding what civilization is like today, who we are as people, what's possible for us? And I think that's in fact exactly the answer to the question, which is we should care because it helps us understand who we are as humans. What is possible inside our own hearts and minds? What's possible for us as groups, as social groups? Because if we have evolved as a species in a certain way, that shapes our proclivities. It shapes what is possible for us individually and as groups. And so understanding the history of who we have been can help us know not only who we are, but who we can be going forward. So all of this is really relevant to giving us a sense of what's possible for humans? What can humans be based on what they have been in the past that has made us who we are today? So I think this is why this is all very relevant to being able to shape our political imagination for what is possible. Then another question that confronts us is, all right, so we've had all of this data about how humans are so different from other species in that we are domesticated, we are homo puppy, we have become much more friendly and reliant on each other, and through that friendliness and our ability to learn quickly from each other, be copycats of each other, we have progressed and evolved in such a way that we've kind of taken over the planet. So our sociality and our ability to learn from that sociality have actually helped us to evolve and take over. So if that's all true, that we're so pro-social, that we're so cooperative, why did the Holocaust happen? Why did we bomb Japan and kill 100,000 people with a drop of a single bomb? Like, why do we do things like that as humans? Like, this story of pro-sociality among humans doesn't explain what we know to be true today, which is that humans can be incredibly, brutally violent. So let's think about the disconnect between what we were as early humans and what we have become today, and think about how that happened. So, what's the story we typically hear about civilization? We typically hear that civilization started out really simple, and we were not very, we were brutish and not very sophisticated or intelligent. And as our societies became increasingly complex and increasingly interconnected with other societies, and things grew bigger and bigger, and we got more inventions. Those inventions then turned into more ease of life, and we got fancier and fancier goods and products that we produced, and more knowledge and more art. We became more civilized, and that all led to somehow us being more less violent and living better, happier lives with less work. Like, things are not as bad today as they once were for us in early times. We would never want to be like we were in ancient times, is what we kind of think about this idea that civilization equals better lives for humans. Is that true? So, if we go back to the question of what humans' lives were actually like for the majority of human evolution, which was as hunter-gatherers, and we look at the data that we are able to collect on what those lives consist of and what characterizes them, what we know, and this is not just one person saying this is a multitude of various kinds of anthropologists who answer these questions. What we know is that hunter-gatherers on the whole have healthier diets than we do today. And that's because as they roam across the land, they're picking up a variety of whatever is out there that's available. So they're eating a much more diverse set of nuts and berries and fruits and vegetables and leaves and animals that they're finding. So if any of you have heard of the paleo diet, this is in fact where the word paleo comes from, paleoanthropology, in the sense that older ways of doing things. We didn't eat a lot of carbs. We definitely didn't eat much in the way of grains. We ate a lot of vegetables, fruits, and meats, and nuts. Those were the things that we primarily ate. So we had a much more nutritious, that means lots of vitamins and minerals in our diets, and much less carb-heavy diets than we have today. We also, as hunter-gatherers, got lots of exercise because we were out roaming across the countryside trying to find things to eat and things to hunt, things to make things with. So we were moving a lot. So that exercise and that healthy diet together also meant that we were moving from place to place. We didn't stay fixated in one spot for very long. Sometimes, a few weeks here, a few weeks there, but we didn't stay in an area for long enough to have like our trash build up or our waste, our human waste build up, like where we were pooping and peeing. That didn't build up around us. because we moved constantly. So we would live lightly on the land and eat well and move a lot and not have a lot of buildup of waste. So we actually were much healthier. We didn't have much in the way of diseases. Early humans did not have much in the way of diseases. And we lived much longer lives than you might expect. We tended to live as hunter-gatherers 70 to 80 years, which is much longer than people who lived in agricultural societies lived. So that was one key aspect of what it was to be a hunter-gatherer. We were healthy. We also didn't work that much. If you think about what it would take to satisfy your needs as a hunter-gatherer, you go out across the landscape and you find where there's some berries, you find where there's some nuts, you find where there's some melons that are interesting, you find where there is some kind of porcupine that you're going to eat. All of that does take time, but not that much, really. And so hunter-gatherers spent a lot of time chilling out, just being social with each other, telling each other stories, dancing and enjoying life. They didn't work that hard because they didn't need that much, and what they needed was mostly right around them and easy to access. When things started to be difficult to access, they didn't have enough of something in an area, they just moved someplace else so that they would again have easy access to the things that they needed. So anthropologists estimate that hunter-gatherers work on average anywhere from, the lowest number I've heard is on average 17 hours a week to the very most being 30 hours a week for a complete life. This is all you would need to do to have what you needed to survive and to thrive, because they were living long, healthy lives. They also had very egalitarian social lives. Egalitarian means equal. So there wasn't a lot of hierarchy between the people who were hunter-gatherers. That includes the fact that there wasn't a lot of hierarchy between men and women. Men and women often did different kinds of work, not exclusively, but to some extent they did have different kinds of work, but they weren't valued differently and their voices weren't heard differently. So they would make joint decisions as groups together, and it wasn't that men got to tell women what to do. Similarly, they did not have this kind of monogamy that became characteristic of agricultural settlements later on. So men and women had sex with who they wanted to and had partners that changed. They might be partnered with someone for a little while and then change and have another partner, and depended on society to society what became normal, but anywhere from 2 to 3 partners over the course of a life to 12 partners over the course of a life. So they were free with their they were equal in terms of hierarchy, and they were rather free with their sexual lives, and they were free with their sharing of the childcare responsibilities as a group. So the group as a whole helped take care of all the children. It's not just certain people that were responsible for caring for children, but rather the group as a whole that contributed. Another thing that has been well established about hunter-gatherers is that there's not high levels of violence. They don't have high murder rates. They don't have high domestic violence rates. They don't have high rates of warfare. If you think about that, that makes a lot of sense. You don't have much in the way of inequality, so there's not a lot of anger at people who have built up more power or more wealth than other people. So there's going to be less jealousy. There's going to be lots of ways to deal with jealousy as well, in the forms, as we talked about in the last video, in the forms of shaming people or making jokes about people or gossiping about people. So there's all these social ways to keep things on check socially between people. But there's not a lot of interpersonal violence, and there's not a lot of warfare. If people are out roaming around the land and moving encampments as they need when they find that they don't quite have what they want in a place, what is there to war over, really? It's not that there is anything to be gained by going to war with another group. Instead, in fact, what became more common is that there was no reason to war with other groups, but people would move between groups. So it's not just that you stayed with the same group of people your whole life. Rather, it's that You maybe got interested in going to see what was going on over in that other little band of people, and vice versa. Or you got mad at the people that you were with for whatever reason, and so you hopped it over to another group that was, 20 miles away. And people moved around such that they built large social networks as hunter-gatherers, as large as 1,000 people that they would know in their social network over the course of an entire lifetime. So hunter-gatherers had rich social lives, they had equal social lives, they had a lack of gender hierarchy, they had a lack of class or racial hierarchy. They have, because this is some people are still hunter-gatherers, and they lived healthy, long lives on top of that. Sounds pretty good, right? So why then did we start settling down and building cities and states and forming governments and all of those other things that came after the lives, the hundreds of thousands of years that we were hunter-gatherers, the lives that we lived as hunter-gatherers? So at the end of the last ice age, which is about 15,000 years ago, as you note from the book, an area in what is now the Middle East, so Iraq, Iran, and Syria, Turkey, the area between the Persian Gulf and the Mediterranean Sea, this area at the end of the last ice age suddenly became teeming with life. It became known as what we call the Fertile Crescent. This is undoubtedly a term you learned in history back in middle school and high school. So the Fertile Crescent became this magnet for humans who found it really easy to live there. And things were so rich and so pleasant in this particularly fertile area that humans started to settle there. Rather than continuing to wander around and get what they need from place to place to place, they started to say, I'm just going to stay right here because everything I want is right here. And as they started to settle and stay in one place, they started to cordon off parts of land and say, hey, I'm here, I got here first, this is my land, you can't have the things that are on this land. So they started to create private property. The first idea of this is mine, not yours, go away. And they started to build groups around the notion of we control this area and you can't come here. So social worlds around the idea of private property. Never before had humans had anything that they owned separately. There was no land owned separately. There was no water sources, no flocks of animals that were owned separately. This all came when humans converged on the Fertile Crescent, didn't want to leave because it was so lush, and then started drawing lines to say, this is ours, not yours. That very, very action of saying mine, not yours, became the impetus for the start of what we know now as civilization, the start of settlements, and then settlements building into cities, and then cities building into states, and in states using warfare to build themselves into empires. So you see where we're going with this. We tend to learn of the cradle of civilization as also being the cradle of the development of agriculture, and that agriculture then enabled all the rise of cities and states and empires that we're going to talk about in a minute. And that is true that agriculture was definitely invented here in this area in the Fertile Crescent. It was invented along these areas of Iraq and Syria now. But that's not to say it wasn't also invented in other places around the world. So rice farming was invented in China, for example. Corn farming was invented in Mexico, and potato farming was invented in Peru. So there's other places where agriculture has also been invented. It's not just the Fertile Crescent, and I want to point that out because it doesn't very often get brought up in a lot of the courses that you have. So let's talk a little bit more about what came along when the Fertile Crescent got settled by humans. But let me pause first and say, okay, so we had, coming out of these settlements, we had the start of cities. Does it mean, though, that cities can only be built with civilizations that are hierarchical, where one person or a set of people control other people who work underneath them, and build the things they want them to build, so that there's a few masterminds who then have minions underneath them to do the work. Is that the only way that humans can build massive structures or beautiful works of art like the Easter Islands or temples or places like Stonehenge? And the answer is no. Humans don't have to have hierarchy to build large-scale products like temples, like art, like Stonehenge. We don't, in fact, have to necessarily have the leaders who are in charge and everyone else who is the minions. We have all of the pictures of what I have up here are instances of what are called collective work events. These are really large-scale, fascinating things humans have done together in just sheer collaboration without any hierarchy of the people who are creating this. They're doing it together with equality rather than with hierarchy. So just note that humans can, in fact, do massive, very impressive things without having the hierarchy of those who require and those who must submit. But in the Fertile Crescent, and the areas nearby, like Egypt, from what we have here, we did start to get hierarchies. So the permanent settlements and the private property that came along with the rise of agriculture in the Fertile Crescent did also contribute to the rise of hierarchy. It's not necessary to have hierarchy to build things, but we did in fact get hierarchy, and the cities around it, the cities that developed out of it, alongside more impressive work events that were egalitarian. So just to note that, note both of that. All right, so we had the rise of agriculture as people left hunter-gathering societies, settled in the Fertile Crescent, started to cordon off private property, and started to say, no, this is mine, not yours, can't come here, and this is my, not only is this my property, but I'm going to give this property to my children when I'm gone, so the idea of inheritance, and I am now dependent on the hard labor of agriculture to eat. So what did these initial agricultural societies look like? This private property and people staying in one place, not moving from place to place and place, meant that they tended to have smaller social networks because they weren't roaming and switching bands as much as hunter-gatherers were. So they lived in like small villages basically, and just interacted with the people who were in their small villages. So they got less diversity of social experiences and diversity of ideas and views as well. Interestingly, they had much less healthy diets. Although agriculture can be a dependable way to eat because you plant a crop, you know you're going to have food, whereas hunter-gathering, you're never quite sure what you're going to encounter. So it can be a stable form of having food. It also is largely based on grains, because if you're going to harvest something all at once from having planted it, you need it to be able to store it so that you can eat it over a long period of time. Things that can be stored, which are grains, are not as healthy as things that are fresh that you just picked off of a plant or hunted from an animal. So grains, you can get a complete diet out of grains, but it's much more difficult than out of a hunter-gathering diet. So people started to not have as healthy of a diet. They didn't have as complete of proteins. They didn't have the array of vitamins and minerals that they once did as hunter-gatherers, and they started to have more disease related to poorer diets as a result of this. They had disease related to diet. They also had higher levels of disease related to the very fact that they were settled. So now they're not moving place to place to place. Instead, they're just staying put so that they can control the land that they are now claiming is theirs, private property. And since they're staying put, they're having to deal with the buildup of human waste. as they start to domesticate animals and keep them on their property with them, they're not only in close contact with these animals all the time, so they're getting the diseases from the animals just by that close contact, but they're also having to deal with the waste from the animals, all the poop from the animals. So they're dealing with their own waste, they're dealing with their animal waste, and they're getting the diseases that the animals carry otherwise. Also, as the book mentions, this is when we start to see, when we domesticated animals, we start to see the rise of bestiality as well. And this is the very first time that humans started to have sexually transmitted infections, STIs, that they're dealing with. So we have poorer diets that are causing us to have more diet-related diseases. We have lower levels of vitamins and minerals, and we are having more and more disease from our interactions with animals, interactions with their waste, interaction with our own waste, and as all the humans become more densely packed in villages and cities and states, we have more communication or spread of disease between ourselves just because we are tightly packed in, whereas hunter-gatherers are spread out, and it's more difficult to transmit diseases back and forth. In villages and towns and cities, it's much more easy to transmit diseases. So our disease rates just skyrocket at this point, both from unhealthy food and also from the fact of just living in cities with each other and with animals. So as a result, our lives shortened significantly. Agricultural societies tended to see humans living only 30, maybe 40 years, and this is down from the 70 to 80 years that we were living as hunter-gatherers, much, much shorter lives. On top of that, we had to work a lot more. It just wasn't as easy to be agriculturalists, to plant and to raise animals, as it was to just roam around and take what we wanted from the planet. So we started to work about 50 to 60 hours a week, as opposed to working only 30 tops as hunter-gatherers. So we are living more diseased lives, we are working longer, and we are dying sooner in agricultural societies. That's all in terms of our health. Socially speaking, we start to develop the rise of patriarchy. As we develop a system of calling land mine and wanting to leave our land to our children, we start to develop the need to know who our children actually are. If you remember, among hunter-gatherers, everybody shared children. They helped to raise children together. Nobody had private property. No one was handing down anything. So the question of whose kid this is, who actually genetically birthed this child, which father was this child from, wasn't really relevant. And people switched partners as it suited their own personal interests and needs. But if you have private property and you start to develop a system where you pass down private property to your children, then you need to know that those children, as a man, you need to know that those children are actually yours. So then you start to develop systems to control women's sexuality so that you can be certain of who has impregnated a woman or not. So you can keep track of whose land goes to whom. So we get out of that a system of obsession with female purity, female sexuality, and all of the concomitant forms of of owning females and then trading them as sort of like giving women as sort of tokens between men who are in power. All the systems of patriarchy develop out of this need to give our private property to our children. So patriarchy arises. Along with that, we also see the rise of chiefs and kings as people settle in an area and start to call property theirs and then expand that group notion of property and then try and defend that group property against others. Chiefs and warriors develop out of that. And from that, then we get a jump to the start of kingships and the start of small kingdoms, and then those kingdoms using warfare to expand until we finally get to empires. And along with that, we get the invention of systems like kings taxing the people who are underneath them, kings demanding servants and work from the people who are underneath them, so work as a form of taxation. We also see the invention of debt. If you have private property, you can lend things to people, and people owe you back. So we start to see debt arise, and writing is actually invented as a way to keep track of whose debts belong to whom and when have they been paid back or not. So writing is invented out of this system of private property. We also start to see a rise of warfare. So as kings expand their power and they continue to want to expand their control of private property, they need soldiers to do so, and they need the means through taxation to pay those soldiers who are going to then help them continually expand their control of private property. So we have the rise of taxes, we have and the rise of money in order to enable kings to more efficiently tax people, to then more efficiently maintain armies, to then more efficiently conquer land. So we get money, we get writing systems for debt, and ultimately we also get organized religion coming up at the same time. So we've got patriarchy has now been invented. Monogamy has now been invented. It didn't exist before for earlier humans and for hunter-gatherers today. We have a system of private property that gives rise to a system of debt and taxation, and the rise of chiefs and kings and wars and empires. With the rise of wars, then you also take captives. Captives become slaves. You create systems of slavery. All of the big, important early states that we're familiar with, like the early Greeks or many of the states that are talked about in the ancient Bibles, all of these had slaves as part of them, coming out of the spoils of war. Slavery was part of all of this. So, and as I noted, you also got the rise of hierarchical and organized religions that grew out of both the wealth and the need to explain diseases, the spread of human diseases and other catastrophes to humans. So all of this together is such a contrast to what we used to live as hunter-gatherers and what hunter-gatherers who live today continue to live, right? So we're hierarchical, we're patriarchal, we have all these forms of poorer health, we have warfare, we've got empire, we have slavery, all of these things are developing out of that. So why didn't we just go back to being hunter-gatherers? It seemed like such a more peaceful, chill, healthy, and social kind of existence. Why didn't humans go back? The answer to that is basically you can't go back. Humans can't really unwind the clock. Once you've built up a culture and a way of doing things, it's very difficult to jump ship and go back to some easier, lighter form of living for a variety of cultural reasons, but also for very specific kinds of skill-based reasons. Hunter-gathering sounds like a chill life, and it is, but it also takes a very complex form of knowledge of the land, being able to read the land, being able to know where things will be, being able to know what's coming in terms of the seasons, what's coming in terms of potential drought and needing to move, being able to read the riverbeds. All of that is actually a very complex skill set that you can't just suddenly jump back into. You have to be raised in a society that does it as hunter-gatherers and that knows it and that teaches it to you, how to read the land, how to find food, how to find water, how to find all the things to be able to survive. You can't just choose to go back to that if you have stopped practicing that for millennia. So even hunter-gatherers who were raised in hunter-gathering families and then who were by the countries that they lived in, forced out of that lifestyle and kept in settlements. Anthropologists have found that when those people who were taken out of hunter-gatherer lifestyle, forced into settlements, tried to go back later, they had forgotten much of the knowledge of the land that they needed to be able to survive in their own lifetimes. So if that's true of a person just in their lifetime, imagine what that would be like over the course of a large human group together, leaving that lifestyle and going into agricultural society and then trying to come back. Like it's and not having done it at all in their lives. It's not something you can go back to easily. It takes it would take a great deal of relearning ways of being. Also, agricultural society allows for humans to build up population density. And one thing that hunter-gatherers are not is dense. So how do you take a dense, pack together a city and disband it and spread it out over the land in a way that it can live again? Like it's not really doable in the same way. It's not that it's impossible, it's just a difficult thing to imagine as a social project. So there are a lot of reasons why once humans have become the way they are, they just keep going in that direction, keep moving forward rather than trying to move back or jump to the side. Not to say that there's never been back to the earth movements. Definitely there have people attempting to go back to the countryside, live in a different way. But it's difficult to imagine an entire society being able to accomplish that in any way that would roll back the ways in which they have evolved towards more density and more dependence on agriculture and greater levels of hierarchy and inequality in terms of wealth and all of that. So it's not that easy to imagine just going back to hunter-gatherer life. Okay, so at the end of this chapter, Bregman seems to say that, okay, yes, hunter-gatherer life was much better than agricultural life, but in recent decades, things have gotten not that bad. We've invented all of these medicines that have helped us conquer many diseases, and industry has allowed us to become really, really wealthy, and people are being pulled out of poverty as a result of human wealth that's been built up. So it kind of seems like he's saying that maybe Hobbes was kind of right. Yeah, things were bad there for a bit in the middle, but now things are ultimately getting better because of our civilization. So it's maybe like a different forms of Hobbes, not a straightforward line to civilization is a better life, but ultimately certain versions of civilization can get us to a better life, some kind of modified Hobbes. So I want you to think about whether or not he's correct. Is it true that poverty is in fact being reduced today? Is it true that we are getting less warlike? Is it true that things are improving in a big way? This is what we're going to call in the next book, The Divide, the good news narrative. So how true is the good news narrative that 2025, 2026, 2027 are better years than 80 years ago, 90, 100 years ago? Is there good evidence of that or not? So keep this as an open question, as a critical thinker, and we will delve into it again. But remember that he himself notes that he was wrong about Steven Pinker. Is it possible that he would amend what he wrote in Humankind based on other kinds of information? And we'll look at some of those other kinds of information going forward in the next book. So that's it for this video. Go now and take the quiz and hit me up with any questions. I will post the answer to the quiz associated with this video after the quiz closes. So it'll be available next Monday. And again, always feel free to come to my office hours, and there's always the Friday video chats at noon where you can ask me for clarifications on the things that you've read, or you can discuss the things that you've read or the things that are in this video. I'm here for that and excited to talk to you about all these things. Have a great rest of your week.